As for how he fits in the NFL, it's obviously complicated for Hunter since he may not even play receiver in the NFL. However, I'm just going to try to keep it simple and just try to focus on how he would be if he only played receiver. So if Hunter only played offense and was able to focus all his efforts on offense and at receiver, he would easily be the best receiver in this receiver class and likely would be a top 10 receiver in the NFL within the next 3 years. Hey all! For this video we'll be finishing the 2025 wide receiver prospects. For the final part we have a lot of exciting receivers, ranging from possible top receivers to sleepers as well, as I'll be covering Traeshon Holden from Oregon, Travis Hunter from Colorado, Tre Harris from Ole Miss, Will Sheppard from Colorado, and Xavier Restrepo from Miami. If you're new to these, my wide receiver evals use some different grading methods. If you want more details on these, you can check out part 1 of the series, as that should be accessible with a link that should be on the screen now, as I have more details than that on how I do my grading. Also, if you want to check out my grades and evals of the receivers from last year for reference, you can check them out with the link in the description. For any new viewers, I have evals full scouting reports out for players like Emeka Egbuka, Elikayo Manor, Isaiah Bond, Jack Besh, Jalen Royals, Jaden Higgins, Jalen Knoll, Isaiah Bond, Kyle Williams, Luther Burden III, Matthew Golden, Nick Nash, Pat Bryan, Ricky White III, Davion Williams, Tate Felton, Ted Roa McMillan, Tez Johnson, and much more if you want to check them out on my channel. As I mentioned in my previous videos, I plan to move the tight ends next and the non-skill positions afterwards, so to be sure you don't miss any other position group series in the future, be sure to subscribe. Now let's finish this receiver series. Starting with Traeshon Holden from Oregon. Though Holden isn't a household name, I do think there's a surprising number of people that might not realize that they actually recognize his name, just due to him playing the last 2 seasons at Oregon, and then the prior 2 seasons at Alabama, and with him being in a lot of nationally televised games. To see how successful he was in those games, by looking at his basic stats, he set career highs in targets, receptions, and yards in 2024. Now while they weren't overly impressive, he still managed to get 54 targets for 45 receptions, 718 yards, and 5 touchdowns. He did have a fair number of drops in 2024 with 3 for a drop rate of 6.3%, and again played the majority of his snaps from the outside, with a little over 70% of his snaps coming from the outside in 2024. Looking at his highlight games in both of his Ohio State games and his game against Penn State, they were pretty unremarkable other than the rematch against Ohio State, when he had 7 receptions for 116 yards and 2 touchdowns. Now, I do think it's worth having the context that Oregon was getting blown out for most of that game, so it is fair to be a little bit wary of that game. His other 2 games were mostly forgettable, with just 2 receptions for 21 yards against Penn State, and just a single reception for 32 yards in his first match against Ohio State. Looking at the rest of his games, he only had 5 or more receptions in 3 of his 13 games, and 50 or more yards in 6 of his 13 games, which are both pretty low marks. So while he may have popped up a few times in televised games, his stats may not show a great player. But to be sure about that, let's take a look at his grades. For his hands, jump ball, contested catch, body control, ball tracking, he shows good hands and clean hand technique. He consistently catches the ball away from his body and had tough hands, which let him be successful on 62.5% of his contested catches in 2024 and 57.9% of his opportunities throughout his career. Also, he showed the ability to make some nice adjustments to throws away from his frame and did a good job high pointing the ball. He also showed some good sidelines awareness and was comfortable finishing catches over his shoulders to help expand his catch radius. Now he can have some trouble tracking the ball though, which did lead to a fair number of double catches and missed opportunities. Looking at specifically his contested catch situations, he can do a better job using his big frame as well to be able to box out defenders, and he can sometimes let them get into the mix and disrupt the play. Also, he can sometimes be a little bit awkward when making adjustments to off-target throws. I think part of the issue is that he just struggles to sync up his upper and lower body, as he can often just kind of lose his feet and have to make a catch while being off balance, despite it just being close enough to his frame where most receivers can just stay upright and just make the catch normally. So Holden ended up getting a B- for his hands, and a B for his jump ball and contested catch, and body control and ball tracking. For his route running and release, there is a fair amount of improvement that's needed, however he is one of the better receivers at maintaining his route path throughout contact. That balance lets him regularly establish leverage early in his routes, and he also has a pretty good eye for identifying holes against zone coverage. Also, he did at least show some nice instances of using stem fakes to be able to add a little bit of nuance to his routes. However, he does tend to round his cuts, and his cuts often just have pretty little explosiveness. He's also a slow accelerator, which shows in his route speed, and he doesn't use any tempos in his routes either. Those issues made it really difficult for Holden to be able to get consistent separation, which is really disappointing considering that he's kind of just an afterthought on the offense and he still can't get separation on a regular basis. His release also contributes to his struggles separating, as he often doesn't have the foot speed to clear press coverage, which often keeps defenders in his hip pockets for his routes. So Holden ended up having things go very poorly with D pluses in both his route running and his release. For his yards after catch potential, future role in athleticism or RAS, he's a solid blocker thanks to using good leverage, setting a good base, and having good hand placement. Also, he has a good transition upfield, and though he isn't the most explosive player, he does have some good timing with his cuts to be able to sometimes make defenders miss in space. He also has good vision and a good understanding of how to adjust the course of his route to be able to best use his blockers. However, he can sometimes have trouble staying upright after tackles despite his bigger size. What further limits him after the catch is his limited athleticism. To make things worse, he seems like a pretty stiff athlete, which affects his change of direction ability. Finally, while he has good technique as a blocker, he can use some more active feet to be able to help sustain his blocks. As for how he fits in the NFL, to be honest, I'm just not exactly sure how he can best help an offense over another replacement option. His athleticism isn't inspiring, his route running and release give him trouble, and while he has good size and adjustment skills, his hands and ball tracking skills just may not let him be able to deliver in those situations. So just as he had a hard time making a significant impact in college, I just have a hard time seeing him making a significant impact in the NFL and earning ample playing time. So Holden's rough grades continued with a C+ for his yards after catch potential, a C- for his future role, and then a D for his athleticism or RAS. For a summary of his strengths, though he can have some lapses, he generally has good hands and has a solid catch radius to make use of his length. Also has really good balance in his routes to be able to maintain his route, establish leverage, and not get bullied by corners like a lot of the other corners in this class tend to do. Finally, he showed a really good eye for finding openings against zone coverage, which will be essential for him to be able to win the NFL due to his limited athleticism. Speaking of that limited athleticism, it shows in his routes and after the catch will further hold him back in the NFL. What will also hold him back is his sloppy routes, which led to corners being able to cover him more easily. Also, his lapses in ball tracking will likely hold him back as well, as defenders will get closer to him and have more of a chance to make a play on the ball, especially if he struggles when making a clean break on the ball. So by taking the average of all his grades, Holden earned a 2.04 out of 4, which puts him in my unlikely to contribute tier. Holden unfortunately just feels like an average player at best to me. While he has good hands, a big frame, and solid ball skills, he lacks the technique and athleticism needed to be a very good to great player. Maybe he can still carve out a role with the team, but I think more than likely he's going to be fighting for a roster spot, and maybe lucky to get a reserve spot on a depth chart. As for a comp, I have Riley Ridley as his comp. Both have good frames to be able to hold up in their route and after the catch. Also, both have solid ball skills and quality hands that can make them seem like good possession receivers. However, both struggle getting separation, what makes it difficult to be able to rely on them on a consistent basis. Both also have lacking athleticism, which further limits their ability to separate and provide much after the catch. Ridley's career was very short-lived in part due to not having special teams experience and not being able to do enough as a receiver with a limited athleticism. I do have worries that the same will unfortunately likely happen to Holden as well. Moving to our next receiver, and the first and only defensive player on this list, Travis Hunter from Colorado. Despite playing full-time offense and defense, the Heisman Trophy finalist had one of the best stat lines of the class, with 121 targets for 96 receptions, 1,258 yards, and 15 touchdowns, which easily set career highs for him across the board. Also, despite likely being gassed in most games, he still had great focus with his hands and had just 3 drops for a drop rate of 3%. To also show how good his hands were, he has 216 targets and just 4 drops for a drop rate of 2.3%, which is crazy for the volume he had and with playing both ways. Also, after playing the majority of his snaps from the slot in 2023, he moved to being a full-time outside receiver, playing about 94% of his snaps from the outside, which is really impressive to see him make that adjustment that quickly over one offseason. Taking a look at his highlight games against BYU, Kansas State, and Nebraska, his only poor game came against Kansas State with just 3 receptions for 26 yards. Meanwhile, he put up 4 receptions for 106 yards and a touchdown against BYU, and 10 receptions for 110 yards against Nebraska when he seemed like quarterback Shadur Sanders' only playmaker that game. The impressive thing is that despite playing on offense and defense, Hunter was still heavily relied on every single week with at least 5 receptions in 10 of his 13 games and 50 in 11 of his games. Playing both full-time offense and defense, and at the pace of play that Colorado plays at, is just incredibly impressive, and I don't think we'll ever appreciate how special he truly was as a college athlete. But to see how special his grades are, let's take a look at some of his grades. For his hands, jump ball, contested catch, body control, and ball tracking, Hunter has arguably the best hands in this class, catching the ball with great hand technique and consistently snatching the ball. He also shows great focus and ball tracking skills to be able to follow through traffic and down the field. Speaking of traffic, he is so good at finishing catches through contact, which shows with him converting 64.7% of his contested catch opportunities in 2024 and 63.3% his entire career. He has such strong hands to be able to finish in those scenarios, which gives him a ton of upside. What also gives him a ton of upside is his ability to adjust to throws. He has such great timing with his ball attacks that show even on defense. Despite having an average build, Hunter actually has a very big catch radius thanks to the way he can be able to finish catches at the end of his frame. He also gives defenders very little ability to make a play on the ball thanks to consistently waiting until the very last moment to finally make his move and make his break. So Hunter started out red hot with an A in his hands, B+ in jump ball and contested catch, and A for his body control and ball tracking. For his route running release, while I was a bit cautious about trusting Hunter going into the year due to being limited to the slot, he pulled a 180 and played nearly every single snap from the outside in 2024. As I mentioned before, I really can't say enough how impressive it is that Hunter is able to pick up essentially a new position while still playing defense, especially since so many receivers just can't make that transition despite having a full focus on offense. Also, while his release wasn't perfect, he was very sudden and explosive in his release and seemed to have a diverse release set to at least help him stay clean. While it isn't perfect, his fluidity can also show in his route running. He has a lot of flashes making tight cuts and creating a lot of separation when he doesn't rush his process. Also, defensive background shows an ability to quickly find openings against the defense and zone coverage. Now, though I was very impressed with his ability to play outside more, I can't pretend like it was a seamless transition. His limited experience outside showed his struggles beating press coverage, which could often frustrate him. While he has very quick feet and a good amount of moves despite his limited experience, he lacks good hand use and needs to improve his timing and strike strains to be able to help him stay clean. Also, while he has a lot of route running potential, he kind of just needs to dedicate the time to be able to learn those routes more fully and just be a receiver to finally take that next step as a route runner. He ran a pretty limited route tree and his cuts and his routes often lacked polish with him rounding them and simply relying on his athleticism at times. He can also sometimes struggle to establish leverage and needs to learn how to trick defenders by selling his vertical to create easier separation. Also needs to improve his peripheral vision as he can sometimes escape one defender but lead himself into another. I would like to see him use a bit more varied tempo in his routes, as it seems like he's just trying to play it as fast as he can and with varying results. I think if he can slow things down a little bit and play a bit more in control, he'd be able to have cleaner breaks in his cuts instead of just throwing himself off balance and going too hot into his break. His top routes show this issue a lot, with him often rushing to his spot, but needing a couple extra steps which create unnecessary movement and slows his process enough to give the defender a chance to make a play on it. So to show that even Travis Hunter is human, he earned just a C+ for his route running and a B- for his release. For his yards after catch potential, future role in athleticism or RAS, his explosiveness shows when he has the ball in his hands, and he has such strong cuts which he pairs with acceleration and fluidity to get a lot of yards after the catch. Also, his effort of course was never in question with the way he could play on both sides, but it really shows in his blocking as well. A lot of top receivers often don't try to block, but despite playing full-time on offense and defense, Hunter was still a very willing blocker in most plays. Also, it wasn't sloppy fake attempts as he kept his feet moving to try to stick to his block. So that is really a testament to a player who's willing to do whatever he can do to help his team win while he has the ball in his hands on offense, while he's trying to take the ball away on defense, or even while he's trying to help his teammate as a blocker. As for how he fits in the NFL, it's obviously complicated for Hunter since he may not even play receiver in the NFL. However, I'm just going to try to keep it simple and just try to focus on how he would be if he only played receiver. So if Hunter only played offense and was able to focus all his efforts on offense and at receiver, he would easily be the best receiver in this receiver class and likely would be a top 10 receiver in the NFL within the next 3 years. Which I know is quite a statement, but I truly believe that is the case and he has all the talent to deliver on that. For Hunter, it just depends on where he ends up playing and how much time he's able to dedicate to one side of the ball. For what it's worth, I do think he's an extremely talented cornerback and could completely understand if a team just wants to play him full-time corner and use him in situational packages on offense, since I think that's the most straightforward approach with Hunter. However, we aren't exactly dealing with a straightforward player with how talented he is. Plus, with how much other receivers are getting paid, I could see him wanting to focus on offense to be able to secure a better deal financially down the road. There's also just better longevity of the receiver position that could also appeal to him as well. So there's a lot of moving parts, which is why Hunter's role in the NFL is one of the most fun topics to discuss. But both when considering what benefits him as well as plays to his strength, I think it is his best choice to be able to primarily or even only play receiver. So things went back to being great for Hunter, with getting an A- for his yards after catch potential, B+ for his feature role, and an unsurprisingly A for his athleticism or RAS. For a summary of his strengths, Hunter has incredible hands and fantastic ball skills to adjust to throws and give him a big catch radius. Also, despite playing so many snaps every game, he showed great effort and was even willing to get his hands dirty as a blocker. Also has likely obvious from playing offense and defense, but he's a very fast learner, which showed with the way he was able to quickly pick up playing outside for the 2024 season. That fast learning ability and explosive and fluidity he has as an athlete makes me very confident he can become a prolific route runner with enough time and effort to be able to focus on his craft. As things are now though, he still runs a limited route tree and has some pretty sloppy technique in his routes that will need more time and focus to be able to improve. Also, he experienced a lot of trouble against press and physical coverage due to his thinner frame, so he'll need to work on improving his arm counters with more time on the outside. That is if he even plays from the outside or receiver at all, since right now we just really don't know how he's going to be used, and it's a big mystery that will likely take time to be able to be answered. So by taking the average of all his grades, Hunter earned a 3.42 out of 4, which puts him in my top tier prospect tier, as well as officially making him my top receiver of the 2025 NFL Draft. While we may not know what position Travis Hunter plays until at least draft day, he should be viewed as a top receiver of this class. His rare blend of elite athleticism, ball skills, and ability to pick up new assignments gives him such a high ceiling that I don't think any other player can truly compete with him. A lot of his deficits can be attributed to a lack of focus at the position due to need to play defense as well. So while I do have lower grades on his route running and release, I can see those very quickly improving depending on a team's approach with him, and depending on how much time he gets to focus on the receiver position. As for a comp, I'll be sticking to my mid-season comp of Garrett Wilson. Wilson was a learning moment for me as I was a bit lower than him on others due to his inconsistency as a route runner and as a release. However, Wilson was able to make these strengths of his thanks to his great athleticism, and I can see Hunter doing the same. Also, both can play bigger than their frame and with really impressive adjustments that they can make to throws. Both are also very fluid athletes once they catch the ball to quickly pick up yards after the catch. While both have their inconsistencies as route runners and in their release in college, I feel confident Hunter can make the improvements Wilson did with how quickly he can pick up things. If he does that, I think Hunter has a ceiling to be an all-pro receiver in the NFL if he chooses to become a full-time receiver. Moving to our next receiver, Tre Harris from Ole Miss. Though Harris only played in 8 games and exited early in 2 of them, he enjoyed a great breakout year getting 76 targets for 60 receptions, 1,030 yards, and 7 touchdowns, which if we turn his 8 games into 7 games based on leaving those 2 games early, that would equal to about nearly 11 targets, 8.5 receptions, 147 yards, and 1 touchdown per game, which are pretty ludicrous numbers. What wasn't as great to see was his drops and drop rates, with 5 drops and a drop rate of 7.7%. Also, he continued to play the majority of snaps from the outside, playing 86% of his snaps from there for the 2024 season. Look at his highlight games against LSU, South Carolina, and Kentucky. He had very good to great games in all, with South Carolina being his worst of the games, but still ending up with 3 receptions for 81 yards. He managed to put up 7 receptions for 102 yards and a touchdown against LSU despite leaving the game early. Also, his Kentucky game was easily the best of his highlight games, with 11 receptions for 176 yards and a touchdown. Look at his full season, he had at least 5 receptions in all of his games, other than the South Carolina game that he at least played the entirety of, and also had no games where he had less than 81 yards that he also played the entirety of. So Harris is clearly a stats monster, but I do think it's worth pointing out that a fair amount of his production did come against non-SEC opponents, including against Furman, Middle Tennessee, Georgia Southern, and a bad Wake Forest team. Now, he did perform well in most of his SEC matchups this season, but he essentially played just half of the Florida game and LSU game, so essentially we only got the equivalent of 3 matchups against quality competition to really know how he would hold up against SEC level players. But let's take a look at his grades to see if they can provide more insight of how he would have performed had he had more opportunities. For his hands, jump ball, contested catch, body control, and ball tracking, if you follow my summer scouting series leading up to the 2024 season, you'll know that I wasn't a big fan of Harris. The biggest thing that made me out on him was his inconsistent attacks on the ball, which were a requirement for him to be successful with his play style. So this year I was very happy to see him make some big strides in this, and now I'll see that it's a strength of his. He did such a great job getting good timing and extending his long arms to get the ball at the highest point. He even did a good job getting better positioning and rising up through contact to get his hands on the ball. That improvement let him take advantage of his great ball tracking skills as well. Those skills let him find lofted balls down the field and finish catches over his shoulders. Also, they helped him make some really impressive adjustments to off-target throws, and he had the hand strength to be able to finish the catch at the very end of his frame. Speaking of hand strength, I was also lower on him due to struggles converting contested catches in 2023 with a success rate of just 35.7%. For 2024 though, he bumped that way up to 61.5%. His more regular use of arm extensions helped a lot, but he also just seemed to have much more secure hands this year. Something that didn't need to improve very much were his hands in regular situations, as he still catches the ball with good hand technique. That being said, he can also be prone to some focus drops that will need to be cleaned up as well. So Harris got off to a great start with A- in hands, jump ball and consistent catch, and body control and ball tracking. For his route running and release, his route running definitely needs help. However, I'd be lying if there weren't some good fundamentals coaches can work with. First, he has a good understanding how to get early leverage in his routes, and then can box the defender out with his size to keep a window open for the quarterback. He also knows how to work to get the defender's hips open to then break inside on slant routes. On those shorter patterns, he does a really good job adjusting to defenders trying to cut off his path to be able to maintain his route path. On deeper concepts, he's very comfortable stacking defenders and has a good eye for openings in deep parts of the field that will help him be a good deep option. For his release, he has a good first step and is often able to muscle his way through press thanks to his strength and balance. However, for those unaware, receivers at Ole Miss don't run a wide variety of routes, and Harris himself primarily ran hitches, posts, slants, digs, and verticals. In fact, per reception perception, 85.7% of his routes in 2024 were made up of those 5 routes, which is an insane amount. For reference, when you compare that to the consensus top 5 receivers of the draft, so Travis Hunter, Tedero McMillan, Matthew Golden, Luther Burden III, and Emeka Buka, none of them had a combined rate over 80% for these routes, and most had rates under 70%. And even if we go to last year and we compare him to, say, Brian Thomas Jr. from last year, whose main critique was a limited route tree, Thomas did also have those routes make up his 5 most frequently run routes. However, his combined rate was only 68.2%. So even with someone that had a main critique of a limited route tree, he still had a rate at about 20% less than what Harris did in last year. So Harris is going to have to work to expand his route tree and be a quality route runner outside those few patterns. Even in those patterns, he still showed a need for improvements as he lacked tempo and doesn't have a lot of conviction in any deception he tries to throw in, which makes him easier to stop. His lack of conviction in his drive is particularly disappointing, as he sometimes just looks too casual with his approach and doesn't back the defender off, which limits his yards after catch potential. He also seems to telegraph his routes a little bit too much, which will make it easier for more savvy defenders to cover him. There were also way too many times on shallow patterns when he would just run to his spots on routes, but not show great awareness to cut off or adjust his route based on the defense. Also, it may have been a coaching thing, but it was just very frustrating to see him run a route like a hitch and make his cut and just refuse to move around to make himself an easier target for the quarterback. On that note, he also didn't show great awareness of finding open space when the play broke down and the quarterback was scrambling. His cuts were also pretty disappointing, with them often being very rounded and lacking great bursts to create greater separation. In general, a lot of these issues also made him inconsistent at beating press when defenders weren't playing off coverage, which does have me concerned. Now, lucky for him, teams were conscious of Ole Miss's deep passing concepts, which often gave him free releases. However, in the releases that he did face press in, he was relatively uncreative in his plan to escape it, and he often just relied on powering through it instead of using his hands, which often led to struggles against more physical coverage and press. So things started to be a lot less promising for Harris, with just a C+ for his route running and a C for his release. For his yards after catch potential, future role, and athleticism to RAS, he has a quick transition from receiver to runner and good straight line speed. He's also a quality blocker who has active feet and good base to be able to stay on his block. He brings very good effort and has a good frame to hold up in his block. Now, though he is a quality blocker though, he can sometimes have some poor hand use, which in turn makes his blocks a lot less effective. Also, when he would make a catch, he was pretty stiff in space and had little ability to make defenders miss. I was at least hoping to see him run through tackles, but his contact balance and strength as a runner just were pretty disappointing. As for how he fits in the NFL, this is where it gets really difficult to project receivers from Ole Miss in the NFL. He's likely going to be asked to play as an X receiver and run a much more expensive route tree in the NFL, which he just hasn't proven that he can be capable of yet. Maybe he can handle that, but from some of his cuts, I just have questions of how successful he'll be. At the very least, he'll be at least good at 5 patterns he primarily ran, so he does have a good starter kit to his route running. But how successful he is in the NFL will depend on how much he can grow that starter kit. At the very least, he does have really good ball skills and blocking to possibly give him a safer floor in case his route tree does take some time. So things did start out bad, but ramped up for Harris with a C- for his yards after catch potential, B- for his future role, and A- for his athleticism or RAS. For a summary of his strengths, Harris' improvements to the hands and ball strikes were a big reason why he's able to have a breakout year in 2024. Also, ball tracking remained great, which gives him some really nice vertical ability. Also, he continued to show some of his strength and balance at the receiver position in the class, which could help him stand out. His blocking could also help him stand out and make teams confident at using him at the X. While teams could feel comfortable playing him at the X, they may not feel comfortable in him producing to start his career, especially with his limited route tree. He needs to branch out from essentially 5 patterns and needs to be able to run the full about 10 route tree gambit to be able to be a reliable receiver in the NFL. If he's going to get there, he's going to need to clean up his cuts to run better routes and get more consistent separation. Also needs to work on diversifying his release package as well, and she'll likely face press more frequently in the NFL, and smarter, better cornerbacks will notice his tendencies. Finally, while he did test great at the combine, he is a bit of a stiff athlete who doesn't have much wiggle to break off several big plays after the catch. So by taking the average falls grades, Harris earned a 2.87 out of 4, which puts him in my good role player tier. I understand that Harris is an analytics darling with the production he put up in 2024, but I just see a player with a lot of holes that likely would have been revealed had he stayed healthy. Missing the Georgia game was one of the biggest bummers of the season, since I feel like that would have been a great litmus test to see how he would have performed against a very good defense. Unfortunately, the injury caused it to remain a question, and one that will require people to answer it based on whether they believe his dominance can't continue in the NFL, or if his lack of certain traits and ability to run certain routes will likely catch up to him. As for a comp, if I didn't care about players needing to be in the league for a certain number of years for my comps, I likely would have considered a comp to Keon Coleman, since they're very similar players. However, I instead have Romeo Doubs as Harris's comp. That might feel like a low-end projection for Harris, but I'm a Packers fan, so I'm probably a lot higher on Doubs than most. Despite not being a household name, Doubs is a very good player when used in the right situation, which I think will be the same for Harris. Both have great ball tracking skills to follow throws downfield and be prepared to attack them. Also both have great ball skills and the ability to attack the ball at its highest point. Also both have very strong hands to finish catches away from their frame and can finish catches through hits. Despite having great ball skills, both are somewhat limited route runners with lacking burst in their cuts to create consistent separation. Also neither have great releases and often rely on power to get through, which often worsens their separation as well. Both are also slightly stiff and weren't able to contribute much after the catch. I've seen some people praising Harris and seemingly having very high expectations of him, but I just have a lot of concerns. There just isn't a great recent history of successful receivers who have the build, athletic makeup, and playstyle that Harris does, so despite the production, what he showed on film, and the history of NFL receivers just makes me a lot more nervous on him than most. Moving to our next receiver, and the final Colorado receiver of this part and the receiver series, Will Sheppard. After transferring from Vanderbilt to Colorado, Sheppard got less targets with 54 targets in 2024, but had slightly more receptions, finishing with 48 thanks to better quarterback play. Also, he still had a fair amount of receiving yards and touchdowns with 621 yards and 6 touchdowns. Now, what I was really happy to see improvements in was in his drops and drop rates. In 2023, Sheppard had 9 drops for a disastrous 16.1% drop rate. In 2024, though, he drastically improved this to just 2 drops for a drop rate of 4%. What was similar in 2024, though, was snap count outside, as he played the majority of snaps outside again. Taking a look back at his highlight games against BYU, Kansas State, and Nebraska, things are kinda hit or miss for Sheppard, ranging from poor games like BYU when he had just a single reception for 4 yards, and then a good game against Kansas State when he had 5 receptions for 83 yards and a touchdown. Looking at his full season, we saw a lot of the same inconsistencies, with him getting at least 5 receptions in just 13 of his games, and at least 50 yards in 8 of his 13 games. So to see if his grades are a bit more consistent, and to get a better sense of how he truly is and what improvements he made, let's take a look at some of his grades. For his hands, jump ball, contested catch, body control, and ball tracking, he got the ball with better focus and had fewer drops as a result. He consistently catches the ball away from his body and has tough hands to be successful on contested catches, with a 50% success rate in 2024. What helped him improve in this was doing a better job using his size and body to be able to box out defenders to protect the ball to make situations easier for himself. With his big frame, he also can make some really impressive adjustments to give himself a big catch radius. That being said, his inconsistencies do pop up when he goes for catches. His hand technique can still be shaky at times, and he seemed to have trouble finishing catches when they were below his waist or even sometimes when going up to attack the ball. It doesn't always show in his stats and with his drop rate this year improving, but he still has a lot of inconsistencies in his concentration and ball tracking, which led to missed opportunities. So while there were inconsistencies, Sheppard got offered a decent start with a B- for his hands and B+ for his jump ball and contested catch and body control and ball tracking. For his route running release, in his route, he's a fluid mover who can navigate around defenders trying to get in his way. Also, he can make some sharp cuts at times and will use nuance in his routes, including head and stem fakes. Despite those good moments of route running and getting good separation, he'll also have other times where he just gets completely blanketed by a defender. Part of the issue is with the struggles that he had against physical coverage and press. Against press, he doesn't use arm counters enough, which often leads to him to having trouble disengaging from press. That also led to trouble consistently clearing and stacking his man on vertical routes. Speaking of routes, his route tree is very limited, and he had issues maintaining his route path against more physical corners. Also, he can often need a couple extra steps to gather himself on hard cutting routes like hitch routes. I also noticed times when it seemed like he struggled finding openings when the quarterback scrambled or the play broke down. So Sheppard ended up earning just a C for his route running and a D+ for his release. For his yards after catch potential, future role, and athleticism to rest, he showed solid blocking moments and overall had solid technique. Also, he had smooth transition after the catch and has some twitch and good timing with his cuts to sometimes make defenders miss in space. However, he was often disappointing in space due to typically going down on first contact. He also just often lacks explosiveness and moves to be a real force after the catch, and he lacks the long speed to be able to break pursuit angles and make bigger plays on a regular basis. As for his fit in the NFL, there is a fair amount of potential of him fitting into a lot of NFL offenses. He has good size, flashes good ball skills and route running, and enough fluidity and athleticism to become a contributor. On top of that, he showed some potential to play inside and outside in previous seasons as well. So I do think there is a world where Sheppard surprises people and becomes a receiver 3, maybe if he's really lucky, a receiver 2 if he goes to a team that is incredibly thin at receiver. However, I think he's just as easily could find himself getting cut before his rookie season if he doesn't improve his consistency. So Sheppard ended up earning a C for his yards after catch potential, a B- for his future role as long as he is able to clean up those consistency issues, and a C+ for his athleticism or RAS. As a summary of his strengths, Sheppard's improved hands were a sight for sore eyes and made him a much more believable NFL prospect in my eyes. Also, he continued to show tough hands and impressive body adjustment skills to show he is capable of becoming a great pass catcher if he continues to improve. He also has some potential to improve his route running thanks to his fluidity and twitch, which show in his routes and after the catch. However, for Sheppard to even get close to his potential, he needs to improve his consistency as it's still just way too all over the place right now. His consistency, especially in his hand technique, is just really rough and just caused way too many issues for him even when he made the catch. Also, he'll need to find a way to expand his route tree and improve against press since he has a lot of potential to do well against both but just isn't delivering yet. Finally, I also like to see him play with better contact balance, give him a bit more of an edge after the catch. As for a comp, I have Rashard Higgins as his comp. Both saw improvements in their hands in their final year of college and have a good catch radii. Also, both have good moments as route runners, which can give them the potential to be more interesting players. However, both struggle with consistency with their hands and their routes that affect their success. Also, both struggle against press and physical coverage, which further limits their big play potential. Higgins did have some solid moments, but struggled to be a consistent playmaker in the NFL. Maybe Sheppard is just a role player as well, but he has the ability to become a possible starter if he irons out his consistency issues. Moving to our next receiver and the final receiver of this group and the entire receiver series, Xavier Restrepo from Miami. After getting an upgrade from Tyler Van Dyke to the likely consensus QB1 Cam Ward, but also seeing more talent competition come to Miami, Restrepo earned fewer targets and receptions with 95 targets and 69 receptions in 2024. However, he was a lot more efficient in those opportunities, with career highs in receiving yards and touchdowns with 1,127 yards and 11 touchdowns. Also, he had a career low for drops and drop rate when playing starter snaps with just 2 drops for a drop rate of 2.8%. What did remain about the same was him primarily playing from the slot, with him playing 90.5% of his snaps from the slot in 2024. Look at his highlight games against Duke, Louisville, and Cal, just wow. He had incredible performances all these games with at least 7 receptions and 101 yards in each of the games. Look at his full slate games, he continued to show his consistency, getting at least 5 receptions in 8 of his 12 games, and at least 50 yards in 9 of his games. But to see if that consistency holds up in his grades, let's take a look at some of his grades. For his hands, jump ball, contested catch, body control, and ball tracking, he can make some really impressive body adjustments to finish catches at the end of his frame. He also does a good job rising up and attacking the ball instead of letting it come to him, which lets him act with a wider than expected catch radius. His ball tracking skills are also good down the field, and is able to consistently finish catches over his shoulders. When he's targeted, more times than not he'll make the catch as he has reliable hands that hold up in contested catch situations with a success rate of 61.5% for 2024 and a career success rate of 52.6%. He also has quick hands that are able to act late to not give the defender time to be able to make a play on the ball. Now, with as good as his hands are, his smaller frame will likely still lead to some limitations with him getting beat by bigger defenders to the ball, and not surprisingly, he likely won't be known for winning 50-50 balls in the NFL. So Restrepo got off to a good start with an A- for his hands, B- for jump ball and contested catch, and an A- for his body control and ball tracking. For his route running release, I can confidently say that Restrepo is likely the best route technician in this class. He runs with such clean routes and looks in control throughout the entire process. He's making quick, snappy cuts with good hip sync while using nuance like tempo and fakes to be able to create consistent separation. He also has such good foot speed that lets him put corners in a blender at times. Also, he has a good understanding how to quickly establish leverage by working his defender's hips open to be able to break to the other side. He also makes himself an easier target for quarterbacks by working back to him and finding openings against the defense. In general, he did a really good job finding openings against zone coverage, as well as when the quarterback was scrambling or when the play broke down. Finally, he does a great job selling his vertical and drive and other patterns to then break the other way for an easy completion. Now, while he didn't have a lot of exposure to press, he does have good foot speed to also give him a chance to win against it. However, in the few snaps I did see him face press, his foot movements were good, but his arms were pretty ineffective due to the shorter length. That difficulty with his release led to him having trouble keeping himself clean, and in general sometimes affected how well he can maintain his route path. He needs to do a better job hedging contact to be able to maintain his path and not lose so much momentum with his route. So while Restrepo earned a great A- for his route running, he earned just a D+ for his release. For his yards after catch potential, future role, and athleticism to RAS, he's a very willing blocker despite his size and has active feet to keep with his block to a respectable degree. After he makes the catch, he runs with good vision and shows good awareness of using his blocks. That being said, to address the elephant on his profile, his 40-yard dash time. While I don't like to react to 40-yard dash times, I think it's really hard to ignore him running a 4.85 40-yard dash at his pro day. That's a pretty horrendous time in a situation where players usually run faster than they do at the combine. Honestly, I don't even know why he bothered running it, since I feel like it'll be hard for NFL teams to overlook it, since there's just not a great track record of receivers with his build running that low over 40 and being successful NFL players. Even if he were to improve it to be in the 4.7s, the only successful NFL receiver I can think of who ran a 40-yard dash in the 4.7s who was healthy at the time of running it was Anquan Boldin. Boldin, though, was an elite tackle breaker, which Restrepo just isn't, so it just doesn't help his case at all. So as much as I do view myself as a film guy, betting on a player to be a statistical outlier is usually a losing game. So while he will be limited to the slot where short area quickness is more of a priority, it's just hard to bet on him being a successful outlier. So Restrepo ended up earning a B- for his yards after catch potential, C+ for his future role, but then a horrendous F for his athleticism and RAS. For a summary of his strengths, while there are athletic limitations, there is a lot on his film that does give the hope that he can make it in the NFL, starting with his hands and body adjustments to throws. While he has a smaller build, he can play like he's bigger thanks to the way he can extend to throws and follow them down the field. Also, he's one of, if not the best route runner in the class. He runs the route with such great control, nuance, and cuts to consistently get separation despite his athletic limitations. Finally, while he isn't a great blocker, his effort is really good and could be good enough to be able to survive in the NFL. However, I just keep circling back to phrases like, despite his limited athleticism, just because it's so lacking from an explosiveness and speed standpoint, which better athletes in the NFL will likely take advantage of. Also, his smaller frame and being limited to the slot will likely only further limit his impact, but will also likely limit the number of teams he can fit on. I think what could also potentially be the final nail in his NFL hopes is his struggles with physical coverage, as that will likely eat into the separation he can typically generate, and will likely make it really difficult for him to be able to make much of an impact on an every down basis in the NFL. So by taking the average of all his grades, Restrepo earned a 2.5 out of 4, which puts him in my may have a future role tier. Restrepo is a player who is a bit limited, but is so great in his limited role. He's one of the best slot options in the class, and is one of the best route runners from a technical standpoint. He's able to run a variety of routes from the slot, and has a very good catch radius to provide a bit more than a slot receiver usually can. Now the big things will be whether a team is looking to add a slot receiver or not, and if he can overcome his athletic limitations. If the athleticism doesn't concern teams, or they aren't looking to add a slot receiver, I have a hard time seeing them want to add Restrepo. However, if they do have a big void at the slot, and are willing to look past the athleticism, I feel he could jump in on day one and be a possible contributor. As for a comp, he's a bit smaller than Restrepo, but there's a lot that reminds me of Cole Beasley. Both are pure slot players, but are fantastic route runners who can win with nuance and their cutting ability. Also, both have very good ball skills that give them a slightly bigger catch radius than expected. Neither have the best athletic ability though, but have just good enough technical skills as route runners to still make an impact. Also, both are limited playing from the slot, which could make it more difficult for them to hear their name called on draft night. Similar to Beasley, I think Restrepo may start his NFL career undervalued. However, with more time, the right fit, and being able to find a way to be able to overcome his athleticism, he could carve out a role and have a long NFL career as a good slot receiver. And that's all for part 10 and for the wide receiver scouting series. Let me know what your thoughts are on all the receivers in the comments and who you think I'm too high or too low on. As I mentioned in previous videos, I'll be moving to tight ends next, and we'll hopefully be able to get to some non-skill position players before the draft as well. So be sure you don't miss any of those groups, be sure to subscribe. While you're at it, like the video as it helped the channel and the series grow thanks to you. If you want just a written form of the eval, you can subscribe to my Substack as I'll the full written eval out for each player at the same time as the video. But thank you all and see you all next time.